Kirisin's antennae twitched right away when she saw the strange blip on her scanner. There was something out there in the dark of space and it didn't look right. Her screen signature was too thick and had too many sharp edges. This thing moved with purpose like a hunter stalking its prey. She looked in her database of ships that the Galactic Concordance knew about. There was no match. As she spoke up, her throat sacs fluttered nervously. "Commander, I'm getting a contact that I can't identify. Bearing 27 Mark III. Commander Velkas was at the main tactical station, where he was looking at routine patrol data. He didn't even bother to look at her. Officer, it's just a ghost sensor. We're not far from the Drift Nebula. Those radiation fields mess with our equipment all the time. Recalibrate and then go back to your station." Kirisin opened her mouth to say something but then closed it again. For 30 cycles, Velkas had been doing this job. She had only been given the job on the patrol frigate Whispered Dawn 6 months ago. Who was she to question his experience? But something didn't seem right. The signature on her screen wasn't acting like a sensor error. It had weight and substance. It really happened. She looked around the bridge. The rest of the crew had already gone back to work, trusting what the commander said. No one was paying attention to her anymore. Kirisin bit her lower jaw and made a choice that would probably get her in trouble for being disobedient. She opened the historical records. Standard protocol only required checking back 50 cycles to identify the person. That included all of the active ships in Concordance space and most of the ones that had been retired. But Kirisin went deeper. She moved the search parameters back by 100 cycles. Then 200. Then 500. Still nothing. Her claws moved over the interface, and her curiosity was fully awake. The old database systems were slower and less smooth. They took longer to handle requests. She kept going back further and further into the past, to records that most officers didn't even bother looking at. 800 times. Nothing. 850. Nothing. 900 cycles ago at the very end of the Purge Wars era, something pinged. Kirisin's other heart stopped beating. She could feel her primary heart beating so hard that it hurt in her head. The match was there, shining on her screen like a threat. The way the ship was set up was from a time before the Galactic Concordance even existed. The energy signature matched perfectly with what was in the old war records. Records that a lot of people thought were just over-the-top propaganda. Records of people. Kirisin had heard the stories when she was a child. All the Velkari kids heard them. 900 cycles ago, the humans almost wiped out her people's empire. They fought with a fierce determination that scared experienced leaders. When faced with impossible odds, other species would give up, but humans seemed to become more dangerous. They wouldn't accept losing. They made every fight a bloodbath. The war had been going on for decades. On both sides, millions died. All of the stars burned. And just when it looked like the fighting would destroy both civilizations, the humans disappeared. One day they were there, and the next day their ships were gone and their colonies were empty. The Velkari Empire said they had won and that the humans were dead. But the old soldiers told stories that were different. They said that people didn't lose. They said that people chose to leave and go into deep space, where the Velkari fleets couldn't follow. They said that people were just waiting and getting stronger in a place beyond the edge of the galaxy. A lot of people thought those stories were made up. The official history said that people were no longer alive. During the last attacks, their worlds had been turned to glass. There were no people who lived. Kirisin looked at her scanner and saw the contact move through space with smooth, controlled accuracy. People said that legends never gave up. They said that people would rather die than give up. They said that people held grudges for a long time. But what if the stories weren't true? What if people hadn't died in the war? What if they had been out there all along watching and waiting? The ship on her scanner wasn't sending out any signals that would help her identify it. It didn't answer normal hails. It was just there, moving through the dark like a ghost from the past. Kirisin was told to report this right away by her training. She had to tell the commander again, show him the historical match, and take this up to the Admiralty. This could have been the most important discovery in 900 cycles. But a part of her wasn't sure. She would look like a fool if she was wrong and this was just a sensor error or a database problem. She would be that junior officer who got scared by old ghost stories and wasted everyone's time. She looked at the contact on her screen for a long time. It stayed on the right course and speed and didn't show any signs of sensor error. Things that are real move through space all the time. Ghosts of sensors flicker and jump. This thing didn't flicker. Kirisin felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. Something was flying toward them from somewhere in the dark. Something that looked like a ship that hadn't been seen in 900 cycles. Something that her people said was no longer around hundreds of years ago. Again she thought about the old stories. About people who never gave up. About warriors who disappeared instead of giving up. About a species that was so stubborn that they would rather die than kneel. What if they had been out there the whole time? What if they had spent 900 cycles building? Getting stronger? Getting ready? And what if they had chosen to come back? Kira's claws were close to the alert button. No matter what happened next, the galaxy was about to change. She could feel it deep down. The people were back. And this time, everyone would think the stories were true. Kira's claws shook as she reached for the panel that let her talk to people. Her heart raced in her chest. She knew that what she was about to do could end her job. Commander Velkas had told her to ignore the contact and keep going. It was a big deal to not follow the orders of a higher-up while on patrol. She could lose her job, be demoted, or even be court-martialed. But something inside her was screaming for her to get in touch. Something old and basic that was in her DNA. For decades, her ancestors had fought humans. They had seen what happened to leaders who didn't take them seriously or didn't pay attention to them. Most of the time, those commanders and their whole crews ended up dead. She got the old communication frequencies from the archive. In 900 cycles, these channels hadn't been used. The Purge Wars had military bands that spoke the formal Velkari dialect that only historians and scholars bothered to learn anymore. Her grandmother was a war historian who was obsessed with that dark time in their past. She had taught young Kirasin how to speak the old way, with formal greetings and rules from before the concordance. Kirasin thought it was a waste of time at the time. Why learn languages that are no longer spoken and customs that are no longer used? But now, her grandmother's lessons might be the only thing that can save her ship from disaster. She typed in the frequency codes with shaking fingers and opened a channel. There was nothing but empty static for a moment, the white noise of deep space. Kirasin thought she was dumb. She was sending out signals on frequencies that no one had listened to in hundreds of years. This was insane. After that, the static changed. There was a clear, strong voice. Meh. She spoke perfect Velkari in the formal dialect, but her accent was strange and old-fashioned, like listening to recordings from her grandmother's history files. Patrol vessel whispered Dawn, "This is the United Earth Expeditionary Ship Relentless. We got your hail and are aware of it." Kirasin felt her blood run cold. The United Earth. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. During the war, the people had called themselves that. The Alliance of Earths. People thought that the government had died hundreds of years ago. The voice stayed calm and professional. "I am Captain James Mitchell, the officer in charge. We ask for permission to set up a safe way to talk to your ship." Her mandibles clicked together without her meaning to, which is a Velkari sign of extreme shock. She made herself talk. You speak our language. How can that be?" There was a pause, and when Captain Mitchell spoke, she could hear something in his voice. Not quite funny but close. As if he had planned for this to happen. "Officer, we've had a lot of time to practice. 900 years is a long time to learn a language. For 900 years. He said it like it was nothing at all. As if his kind hadn't died out hundreds of years ago. Mitchell's voice got more serious. "We have things in common that we need to talk about. The Darkin are invading neutral space. Your border defenses in sectors 7 through 12 are not working. And most importantly, why we've decided to reintroduce ourselves to the Galactic Concordance at this very moment. The Darkin." Kirasin felt another chill. The Darkin were a nightmare that had been getting worse for the last few cycles. First, there were raiders and then there were organized attack fleets. They had been pushing into Concordance territory to see how strong their defenses were and look for weaknesses. The Admiralty was worried, but they tried to keep it from the lower ranks. How did this person know about the Darkin? How did he know where they were weak in defense? Were they watching? Have you been spying on Concordance communications all this time? The doors to the bridge burst open before Kirasin could answer. Commander Velkas burst in, his face dark with rage. "Officer Kirasin, what the heck do you think you're doing? I told you exactly what to do." He stopped in the middle of a sentence when he saw her screen. Captain Mitchell waited the whole time. The Relentless, his ship, was still in space. It didn't move forward. It didn't back down. It didn't charge weapons or get ready for battle. It just sat there like a predator that knew it had all the time in the world. Like something that had been waiting for 900 years and could easily wait a few more hours. Kirasin used her long-range scanner to watch the human ship. The readings said it was smaller than their patrol frigate. But she no longer believed those readings. Who knows what kind of technology humans would have made if they had lived in deep space for 900 years. That little ship could have powers that would make a Velkari dreadnought look like a toy for kids. Finally, after what felt like forever, Commander Velkas got his orders. He opened a channel to the human ship, and his voice was empty and his face was pale. "Hello, Captain Mitchell. I am Commander Velkas of the Velcari Patrol Frigate," whispered Dawn. "Concordance High Command has given me permission to grant your request. You have permission to dock. You can bring a group of no more than 4 people on board our ship." There was a short break. Then Mitchell said something, and Kirisin heard something in his voice that made her skin crawl. Not exactly anger. Just being sure. Trust. The tone of someone who had all the cards and knew it. "Understood, Commander. But first, I want you to know something." Mitchell stopped talking for a moment, and when he did, his voice was stronger. "You said we are not the same species, you remember? I believe that's true. 900 cycles can change any society. You've become softer and more at ease. You don't remember what real war is like." Velkas didn't say anything, but his claws dug into the edge of his console until they turned white. Mitchell went on. "But I want to be just as clear, Commander. We are not the same kind of people you remember. We aren't the desperate survivors who barely made it out of your empire's fleets. We aren't the people who ran away into the dark because we knew we couldn't win. We left on purpose. We left to make something better. Something better. Something that would make sure we never had to run again." There was no sound on the bridge at all. All of the officers stood still and listened. Mitchell said quietly, "We've been watching you for a long time. Watching your wars, your politics, and your growth. Watching you fight against threats like the Darkin. And we've been waiting for the right time to return. Not like beggars asking for mercy. Not like people who have been beaten asking for scraps. But as equals. As friends. As partners." He stopped again. "Or as foes if that's what you want. You have a choice." Commander Velkas swallowed hard. His voice barely worked when he spoke. "We pick our friends, Captain Mitchell. Please continue with the docking process." "Good choice," Mitchell said. "We'll see you soon." Relentless out. The channel is no longer open. Kirisin looked around the bridge at the other officers. Every face she saw was scared. Fear of what was to come. Fear of what these people had turned into. But she also noticed something else. Something that surprised her. She saw a chance. Because if people really did survive and get stronger, they might not be enemies anymore. Perhaps they were just what the Concordance needed. It turns out that the legends were true. People never give up. They just waited for the right time to show everyone they were wrong. The airlock hissed open and the sound seemed to echo through the entire docking bay. Everyone in the honor guard stood frozen at attention. Kirisin felt her legs trembling slightly, but she forced herself to remain still. She'd watched the old war footage dozens of times during her training. Humans in those recordings looked like demons. Covered in battle armor, faces hidden behind dark visors, moving through combat zones like unstoppable killing machines. The propaganda vids from the Purge Wars showed them as savage creatures driven by rage and violence. She expected monsters to walk through that airlock. Captain James Mitchell stepped through first, and Kirisin had to consciously stop herself from gasping. He was tall, easily a head taller than most Velcari. His hair was gray, cut short and neat. Deep lines marked his face, the kind that came from decades of hard decisions and harder battles. Scars ran along one side of his jaw and disappeared under his uniform collar. This was clearly a man who'd seen real combat, who'd survived things that killed other people. But his eyes were what shocked her most. They were calm, steady, almost gentle. There was intelligence there and careful observation, but no hatred, no anger. He looked at the Velcari honor guard the way a teacher might look at nervous students, not the way a warrior looked at ancient enemies. Behind him came another human, a woman who moved with the same fluid confidence. Lieutenant Grace Harper, according to the briefing Kirisin had quickly scanned. She was younger than Mitchell, maybe in her 30s by human standards. Her skin was darker, her hair pulled back in a tight braid. She had the same unsettling composure, like someone who'd walked through fire so many times that nothing could shake her anymore. Both humans wore simple uniforms, dark blue with minimal decorations. No weapons visible, though Kirisin suspected they were armed. Their boots made soft sounds on the deck plating as they approached. Mitchell stopped a respectful distance from Commander Velkas and placed his right fist over his heart in a formal salute. When he spoke, his Velcari was flawless, using the modern dialect without a trace of the ancient accent from the radio transmission. "Permission to come aboard, Commander. We come in peace and good faith." Velkas returned the salute stiffly. "Permission granted, Captain Mitchell. Welcome aboard," the whispered Dawn. The formalities completed, they moved to the observation deck. It was the largest open space on the patrol frigate, with wide windows looking out into the star field. Someone had set up a conference table with chairs adjusted for both Valkyrie and human physiology. Kirisin found herself assigned to the meeting as a historical consultant. Her knowledge of the Purge Wars, once just an academic interest, had suddenly become the most valuable skill on the ship. She sat quietly at the side of the table, trying not to stare at the humans. They moved so differently than Valkyrie. More fluid, more economical with their gestures. And they were watching everything, those calm eyes taking in every detail of the ship's interior. Commander Velkas settled into his chair and folded his hands on the table. Captain Mitchell, I'll be direct. Our historical records indicate your species was rendered extinct during the final battles of the Purge Wars. The official accounts state that human colonies were destroyed and no survivors remained. So how exactly are you sitting here in front of me? Mitchell leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. We left, he said simply. We didn't lose the war, Commander. We made a tactical decision. A tactical decision? Velkas's mandibles twitched with barely concealed disbelief. You fled. You abandoned your worlds. We withdrew, Mitchell corrected gently, but there was steel underneath the soft tone. There's a difference. Your empire's fleets were vast and your supply lines were short. You were fighting in your own territory with reserves and reinforcements always close at hand. We were fighting hundreds of light years from Earth, our main colony worlds scattered and vulnerable. Lieutenant Harper added, we ran the calculations. A war of attrition would have destroyed both our civilizations. Every battle was costing us ships and lives we couldn't replace fast enough. Meanwhile, your production capacity was barely dented. Kirisin couldn't help herself. So what changed? Why didn't you just surrender? Both humans looked at her, and she felt herself shrink slightly under their gaze. But Mitchell smiled, and it was a genuine smile, not mocking. That's a good question, officer. The answer is simple. Humans don't really know how to surrender. It's not wired into us the way it might be for other species. We'll negotiate, we'll compromise, we'll make deals. But complete surrender, admitting defeat and giving up? That's not something we do well. So we took option 3, Harper continued. Your fleets couldn't reach our deep space colony ships. They were too far out, too scattered, moving too fast. And you couldn't afford to chase them because it would have left your core worlds exposed. So we loaded everything we could onto those ships. Technology, knowledge, population, industrial equipment. And we left. Left to where? Velkas demanded. The galaxy is well mapped. There's nowhere to hide an entire civilization. Harper stood and activated a holographic display at the center of the table. The galaxy appeared in miniature, spinning slowly. She gestured, and the view expanded outward, beyond the familiar spiral arms, beyond the established borders of the concordance, out past the galactic rim where stars became sparse and darkness dominated. We went where you couldn't follow, she said quietly. Out beyond the edge. Into the void between galaxies. The hologram changed. Star systems began appearing in the darkness, one by one. Then dozens. Then hundreds. The dots of light spread across the projection like a growing infection, representing colonies, stations, industrial worlds. The numbers kept climbing. Thousands of systems. Tens of thousands. Kirisin felt her breath catch in her throat. The territory displayed in that hologram was enormous. It dwarfed the entire Valkyrie Empire. It made the Galactic Concordance look like a small neighborhood. We spent the first 200 years just surviving, Mitchell said, his voice taking on a distant quality, like he was reciting history he'd studied deeply. Building infrastructure, establishing colonies, setting up supply chains. The next 300 years we focused on expansion and growth. And the last 400 years. He paused. We've been preparing. Preparing for what? Velkas asked, though Kirisin suspected he already knew the answer. For coming back, Harper said. But not as refugees or beggars. As equals. We've been monitoring your transmissions for centuries. Watching your politics, studying your technology, learning your languages and customs. We know everything about the Concordance. Your economy, your military capabilities, your internal conflicts. Mitchell leaned forward, his expression becoming grave. And we know about the darkened swarm. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Velkas stiffened. The Darken are a manageable threat. Raiders and pirates, nothing more. Commander, please don't insult our intelligence, Mitchell said quietly. We've been tracking the Darken for 50 years. We know what they are. We know what's coming. Harper manipulated the hologram again. The display shifted, showing the edge of concordance space. Red markers began appearing, spreading like blood in water. The raids you've been experiencing are scout forces. Advance units testing your defenses and response times. The main swarm is 3 months behind them. Maybe 4 if you're lucky. The red markers continued spreading until they covered nearly a quarter of Concordance territory. The numbers appeared next to the display. Ship counts in the millions. Ground forces in the billions. Kirisin heard herself whisper, "That's impossible. No force that large could exist without us knowing." Mitchell looked at her with those calm, sad eyes. "You haven't been looking in the right places, officer. The Darkin breed fast and they don't need the infrastructure that other civilizations require. They're a biological swarm, not a technological society. And they're coming whether you believe it or not." Velkas was pale now, his claws gripping the table edge. "If what you say is true, then the Concordance can't stop them. We don't have the forces to fight off an invasion of that scale." "We know," Harper said simply. "That's why we're here." Kirisin looked between the two humans, understanding dawning. "You can stop them," she said softly. "That's what you've been preparing for." Mitchell's expression hardened into something that reminded her of the old war footage. "We've been preparing for 900 years, officer. Building fleets, developing weapons, training soldiers. We've fought the Darkin before, out in the dark beyond the rim. We know how they think, how they fight, how to kill them." He stood up slowly, and suddenly the gentle old captain was gone. In his place stood something else. A warrior. A survivor. Someone who'd spent centuries making sure his species would never have to run again. "The question isn't whether we can stop them," Mitchell said quietly. "The question is whether you'll let us help you. Or whether 900 years of hatred is more important than survival." The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Outside the windows, the stars watched and waited for an answer that would change everything. The Darkin came out of nowhere. They never said who they were, what they wanted, or gave their targets a chance to give up. That was how they did things. Hit quickly, hit hard, and leave nothing but destruction behind. The alarms sounded like blows to Kira's ears. The bridge of the Whispered Dawn was lit up with red emergency lights, and her tactical display suddenly filled up with contacts. 12 ships had just come out of warp space, appearing out of nowhere like ghosts in the dark. They had set themselves up perfectly, blocking off all possible escape routes. The patrol frigate was stuck. "Darkin warships," the sensor officer yelled, his voice shaking with fear. "All 12 contacts are capital class. We're in a kill box." Kirisin's claws flew across her console, bringing up detailed scans. The Darkin ships were real-life nightmares. Their hulls were not made of metal and composite like most ships. They were living tissue that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence. Green and purple lights moved across their surfaces like sick blood moving through veins. She knew from battle reports that each ship was about the same size as a Valkyrie destroyer, but they hit much harder than their size would suggest. Commander Velkas was standing up, and his mandibles were clicking quickly, showing how stressed he was. "Get to your battle stations. Get me firing solutions on the contacts that are closest to me. Helm, get ready for an emergency warp jump." "We can't jump, sir," the helmsman said in a hollow voice. "They've put in warp inhibitors. We're stuck in normal space." Velkas hit the console with his fist. They knew. They were aware of the meeting with the people. "This isn't a random meeting on patrol. They've been keeping an eye on us." The consequences were scary. If the Darkin had intelligence networks that could find out about the human contact, they were much more organized than the Concordance thought they were. They weren't just mindless thieves. They worked together, planned ahead, and were patient. "We're outnumbered 6-1, the tactical officer yelled. "And outgunned by 3 times. Sir, we need to send out a distress signal and hope reinforcements get here before." "Before what?" Velkas snapped. "Before they rip us apart? The closest fleet parts are 4 hours away. We don't have 4 minutes." Kirisin looked across the bridge at Captain Mitchell, who was standing there. The person hadn't moved when the alarms went off. He was still at the observation viewport, hands calmly clasped behind his back, watching the Darkin ships move into position to attack. He looked almost bored, as if he were watching a training exercise instead of death. Lieutenant Harper was standing next to him, also relaxed. Her fingers moved around the screen of a small handheld device as she checked something. Neither person looked scared or stressed. Mitchell reached up and tapped the earpiece that was in his ear. It sounded like he was ordering coffee instead of getting ready for battle. "Lieutenant Harper, I think it's time we stopped pretending to be a small patrol ship. You can stop using the masking field." Kirisin's eyes shot to her sensor display. The relentless, A human ship had been showing up as a small frigate, about half the size of the Whispered Dawn. But now things were different. The readings started to change a lot. Energy signatures went up sharply. The ship's weight reading suddenly went up 3 times, then 4 times. She saw the hull look like it was rippling like water on the visual feed. Parts that had looked like smooth armor plating suddenly came apart, opening up like the petals of a mechanical flower. The change took about 5 seconds. The small frigate was gone when it was done. Something that made Kirisin's throat catch hung in its place. A dreadnought. A real capital-class warship that was even bigger than the biggest darkened ship. The hull was smooth and sharp with aggressive lines and angles. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, of weapon ports on every surface. Point defense turrets, missile launchers and energy cannons that glowed with power that was barely contained. It looked like the ship was designed by someone who knew that war was all about using overwhelming force on your enemy until they stopped existing. By the founders, Velkas whispered. That's not possible. The sensor profile, the mass readings and everything else were all hidden. Harper looked up from her phone and smiled a little. Stealth tech. We have had 900 years to get it just right. We can't be seen when we don't want to be. We're a little patrol ship when we want to look small and harmless. And what will we do after we play games? She pointed at the screen. We show you who we really are. Mitchell opened a line of communication. His voice could be heard on all frequencies so everyone in the area could hear it. The darkened ships, the Whispered Dawn, and probably 5 or 6 other ships are keeping an eye on this area. USS Relentless to darken attack fleet. You have 5 seconds to turn around and stop your attack run. This is the only warning you will get. 5, 4, 3. The Darken didn't say anything. Their language didn't work well for talking on the phone. They shot back instead. 6 ships fired plasma bolts at the same time, sending streams of superheated death toward both the Whispered Dawn and the Relentless. Lieutenant Harper's voice came through Mitchell's comm link, and she sounded like she was bored. Engaging enemies. All weapons are free. The next thing that happened lasted exactly 43 seconds. Kirisin knew because she couldn't take her eyes off the combat timer on her display. The Relentless didn't rush into battle like a Valkyrie ship would. It didn't try to take hits and deal damage. It moved like a living thing, like a predator that had been watching its prey for hundreds of years and knew exactly where to bite. The dreadnought moved sideways with an impossible amount of grace for something so big. The darkened plasma fire went through empty space where it had been just a moment before. Then the Relentless started shooting, and Kirisin understood why her ancestors were so scared of humans. Rail cannons fired in perfect order, with computers that were much more advanced than anything the Concordants had, figuring out how to aim each shot. Solid slugs that sped up to a small part of light speed went through darkened hulls like they were paper. The organic ships tried to heal the damage and regenerate, but the humans knew how to stop them. After each rail round, an explosive penetrator went off right away inside the wound, tearing the ships apart from the inside. Point defense systems made a web of fire so thick that nothing could get through it. Every missile that the Darken fired. The Relentless fired its own missiles, which were not the same as the Valkyrie's simple rockets. These weapons were smart because they had their own sensors and thrusters that let them move around. They avoided incoming fire, worked together to attack in coordinated patterns, and hit weak spots in the Darken hulls with deadly accuracy. A Darken cruiser tried to ram the human ship, probably hoping that its organic mass would be enough to break through the shields. The Relentless smoothly turned, showing a different shield facing, and shot a long energy beam that cut the enemy ship in half lengthwise. The 2 pieces floated away from each other, letting air and biological fluids escape into space. Another Darken ship tried to escape, and its crew finally realized they were outmatched. The Relentless shot 1 missile at it, which chased it down. The Darken ship couldn't get away because the weapon was so fast. The blast made Kirisin's sensors glow like a little sun. The Relentless moved with mechanical accuracy the whole time. No wasted movements. No risks that aren't needed. Every move was planned to be as effective as possible. It was like watching a master craftsman work, but the craft was death and the materials were enemy ships. When the 43 seconds were up, the area around them was full of debris and clouds of gas that were getting bigger. 12 darkened ships had joined the fight. 12 pieces of wreckage now fell through the void. The Relentless floated in space with shields that barely showed anywhere and a hull that was completely clean. The ship with people on it hadn't been hit at all. Captain Mitchell turned away from the window and looked at Commander Velkas. He looked calm and matter-of-fact, as if what had just happened was normal. Commander, the Darken are a problem. But people figured out how to deal with them about 600 years ago. We've fought them in the past. We know how they work, what they are made of, and where they are weak. He pointed at the wreckage. They depend on numbers and growth. We made weapons that kill faster than they can heal and strategies that use their own numbers against them. Once you know how they think, it's not hard. Kirisin stared at her display, trying to make sense of what she had seen. The old war videos from the Purge Wars weren't lying. They had downplayed it. People were good at more than just fighting. They had turned war into a science and improved it over the years until it became art. She remembered the old saying that soldiers used to whisper during the war. People don't back down. They load again. She now knew what it meant. People didn't run away to hide. They ran away to work. To get ready. To get so strong that no one could stand up to them when they came back. The Darkin had just learned that. Kirisin also thought that the rest of the galaxy was about to learn it. The diplomatic chamber aboard the Whispered Dawn had never been designed for a meeting of this importance. It was meant for routine negotiations with trade vessels or minor border disputes. Now it held the fate of 2 civilizations, maybe more. Every chair was occupied, and holographic projections filled the remaining space, showing the faces of Velcari admirals scattered across dozens of star systems. Kirisin stood at the back of the room, her official role as historical consultant giving her access to this moment of history. She counted at least 15 admirals on the quantum link feeds, their images flickering slightly as the signals traveled across vast distances. Every one of them wore the same expression, a mixture of naked fear and desperate hope. They all stared at Captain Mitchell like he was both their worst nightmare and their last chance at survival. Admiral Torvas spoke first. He was ancient by Velcari standards, his carapace dulled with age, his movements slow and deliberate. But his mind was still sharp, and his voice cut through the tension like a blade. Let's not waste time with pleasantries, Captain Mitchell. You want something from us. Humanity doesn't return from 9 centuries of silence out of charity or goodwill. So tell us plainly, what do you want? Mitchell nodded slowly, showing no offense at the blunt question. You're absolutely right, Admiral. We want an alliance. A real one, not just words and empty treaties. Equal partners with shared technology, coordinated military defense, and mutual support. We want to stand together against what's coming. Commander Velkas, who'd been standing near the viewport, turned sharply. What? You just destroyed 12 Darkin warships in less than a minute without taking any damage. Your technology is centuries beyond ours. Your military capabilities are overwhelming. You could crush the entire Concordance as easily as you crushed those raiders. So why do you need us? What could we possibly offer you that you don't already have? The question hung in the air. Kirisin had been wondering the same thing. The humans clearly didn't need military help. They didn't need resources or territory. They had an entire civilization beyond the galactic rim, vast and powerful and completely self-sufficient. So why were they here? Lieutenant Harper stepped forward and activated the holographic display at the center of the room. Because those weren't raiders, she said quietly. What you've been fighting for the past 3 years, what you've been calling the Darkin incursion. Those are scout forces. Advance units sent ahead to probe your defenses and gather intelligence. The display changed, showing tactical projections that made Kirisin's blood turn to ice water. Waves of red markers appeared, thousands of them at first, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. They moved across the simulation like a living disease, consuming everything in their path. Harper continued, her voice clinical and detached. The main Darkin swarm is approximately 3 months behind the scouts. Maybe 4 if they stop to consolidate forces. And they're not just heading for concordant space. She manipulated the display, showing the swarm's projected path. They're heading for human territory too. Our colonies beyond the rim. Everything we've built over 9 centuries. The numbers appeared next to the projection. Kirisin read them 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. 5 million capital ships. 60 million support vessels. Billions of ground troops. Population centers that could spawn new forces continuously. It wasn't an invasion fleet. It was extinction on a galactic scale. That's impossible, one of the admirals whispered. No force that size could exist. The resources alone would require stripping entire systems bare. Mitchell's expression was grim. The Darkin don't need resources the way we do. They don't build ships and factories. They grow them. They're a biological collective, a hive organism that reproduces exponentially. Every world they conquer gives them more biomass to convert into more soldiers, more ships, more of everything. And they've been growing unchecked in the dark spaces between spiral arms for thousands of years. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. We've been preparing for this fight for 900 years, Admiral. We've built fleets specifically designed to kill darkened vessels. We've developed weapons that disrupt their biological systems. We've trained soldiers in tactics that exploit their hive mind weaknesses. We have plans, strategies, contingencies. But here's the truth, we can't fight a two-front war. Harper pulled up another projection. This one showed human space beyond the rim, a vast arc of star systems. If the swarm attacks us in concordant space simultaneously, we have to split our forces. Defend two separate fronts across thousands of light years. And if we do that, we'll lose. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. We'll run out of ships, out of ammunition, out of people. The Darken will grind us down through sheer numbers. And the same applies to you, Mitchell added, looking directly at Vel'Kas. The Concordance military isn't ready for this. Your defensive doctrine is built around fighting other technological civilizations. Border skirmishes, fleet engagements, territory disputes. You're not prepared for a biological swarm that doesn't care about casualties and doesn't negotiate. Admiral Torvas's mandibles clicked repeatedly, a sign of deep thought. So what exactly do you propose, Captain? A defensive pact, Mitchell said simply. We share our military technology with you. Weapons designs, shield frequencies, tactical data on darkened weaknesses. Everything we've learned in 6 centuries of fighting them. In exchange, you provide staging grounds for our fleets on this side of the rim. Your space stations for logistics and repair. Your intelligence networks for early warning. Your industrial capacity to help build the ships and ammunition we'll need. He stood up, his full height imposing in the small chamber. Together we create a unified front. One continuous defensive. The silence that followed was heavy. Kirisin could see the admirals looking at each other through their holographic feeds, having silent conversations through facial expressions and subtle gestures. This wasn't a simple military decision. This was about trusting the species that had nearly destroyed them 900 years ago. Finally, Admiral Torvas spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of history. The Vel'Kari Empire once tried to exterminate your species, Captain Mitchell. We hunted your colony ships. We glassed your worlds. We declared total war and showed no mercy. And now you come offering alliance? Forgiveness. Mitchell's smile was cold and sharp. We don't forget, Admiral. Every human child learns about the Purge Wars. We remember our dead. We remember our burning worlds. We remember running for our lives into the dark. He paused and his voice hardened. But we learned something important during those 9 centuries of exile. Survival matters more than revenge. Practicality matters more than pride. Today's enemy might become tomorrow's ally when a bigger threat emerges. He gestured at the display showing the approaching darkened swarm. That's the bigger threat. That's the enemy that doesn't care about our history or our grievances. The Darken will kill you just as dead as they'll kill us. They don't distinguish between Vel'Kari and human. We're all just biomass to convert into more soldiers. Commander Vel'Kas spoke up, his voice quiet. And when the Darken are defeated, if we survive this war? What happens then, Captain? Do we go back to being enemies? Do you take revenge for what my ancestors did to yours? Lieutenant Harper answered before Mitchell could speak. Then we'll have 900 years of mistrust to overcome, Commander. Generations of hatred and fear to work through. Treaties to negotiate. Borders to establish. All the complicated, messy work of building actual peace. She smiled slightly. But at least we'll both be alive to try. At least our children will have a chance to know each other as something other than ancient enemies. Mitchell added, we're not asking you to forget the past. We're asking you to prioritize the future. Make the hard choice. The smart choice. The choice that keeps both our species alive. The admirals conferred quietly among themselves. Kirisin watched the holographic feeds, seeing arguments play out in expressions and gestures. Some were clearly against the alliance, their distrust of humans too deep to overcome. Others seemed convinced, understanding that pride was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. Admiral Torvas finally spoke for them all. We'll need to consult with the full Concordance Council. This decision affects every member species, not just the Vel'Kari. But speaking for myself and for the Admiralty, I believe we have no choice. The alliance is acceptable. We'll work out the details on the way to High Command. Mitchell nodded formally. Then let's not waste time. The Relentless will escort the Whispered Dawn back to Vel'Kari space. We can begin technical briefings during the journey. As the meeting broke up and admirals began disconnecting their quantum links, Kirisin made her way to the observation port. The Relentless hung outside, its massive hull visible against the starfield. She watched as both ships prepared for warp jump, their engines beginning to glow with building power. The human ship's engines burned with an intensity that seemed almost alive. The light was bright, clean, refined to impossible efficiency. 900 years of engineering advancement packed into those reactors. 900 years of improvement, innovation, and relentless determination to be better than before. Kirisin thought about the history books she'd studied. The propaganda that painted humans as extinct failures who couldn't survive against Valkyrie military might. The legends that old soldiers told about enemies who never quit. The truth that lay somewhere between the two. The galaxy had thought humanity was extinct. A cautionary tale about what happened to species that fought above their weight class. A legend to frighten young soldiers and teach them about the cost of defiance. They were all wrong. Humanity hadn't been destroyed in the Purge Wars. They'd been patient. They'd withdrawn not out of weakness but out of strategy. They'd spent 9 centuries building, growing, evolving, preparing. And they'd returned exactly when they were needed most, exactly when the galaxy faced a threat that no single species could handle alone. They didn't come back as conquerors seeking revenge. They came back as allies offering partnership. Not because they'd forgiven or forgotten, but because they understood something that took her people centuries to learn. Sometimes winning means knowing when to set aside old grudges and face new threats together. The two ships jumped to warp simultaneously, their warp fields merging briefly before separating into individual tunnels through spacetime. Kirisin watched them go, carrying the weight of 2 civilizations' futures on their hulls. She finally understood the old saying that had haunted her since childhood. Humans don't lose wars. They just change the timeline. They don't retreat. They reload. And when they come back, they make sure no one can stand in their way again. The legends were true after all. Just not in the way anyone expected.